This is episode 591 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by Senator Bill Tallman. He represents Bernalillo County in the state Senate in Senate District 18. He is a Democrat and is retiring after this year, essentially, when the new Senate districts and a lot of new faces up in Santa Fe will be taking their seats in the legislature. But welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Senator Tallman.
Well, thank you for the warm welcome.
So, before we get into a little bit on your background, I guess the thing that most people were wondering about at the end of the last session is there going to be a special session? So essentially, is your job largely wrapped up, or are you do you expect that you'll be returning to Santa Fe for potential votes and potential meetings again? I know that's a little bit of a crystal ball there, but figured I would ask that right away out of the chute.
Well, my humble opinion is I think the governor probably would have called it. If she's going to have a special session, she probably would have called it by now. So I guess to answer your question, I would say maybe a 50-50 chance.
All right, fair enough. All right, well, let's get into a little bit about you and your background. And I know a little bit about you and your background. You've been in the legislature. You're wrapping up 8 years in the state Senate. To my knowledge, it's the only elected office you've held in New Mexico, but you have been involved in other elected positions and unelected positions, I believe, in cities across the nation. So you have maybe a broader view of public service in terms of geographical areas that you've lived in and represented than a lot of people up in Santa Fe. Talk a little bit about just your personal history and what led you to get into public service, et cetera.
Well, I never held elected office in other states. I was always worked for 35 years as either an assistant city manager or as a city manager, which was was a appointed position.
Okay, got it.
And I loved the career. It was great. Um, hit
Where were you at? Just to ask.
well. I've been in several states. I love being a city manager. It was a great career. I love the challenge. I love the fact that I felt I was making a difference. And I love the variety. You dealt with so many different things. I remember I used to go to Chamber of Commerce meetings in Moline, Illinois. Became good friends with the chamber president there, and I'd look at the agenda, and 80% of the agenda items dealt with the city. And I used to kid my friend. I said, "Well, if it wasn't for the city, you wouldn't have much of an agenda." So, uh, yeah, I got interested in local and state government when I took a course at Syracuse University in a course entitled State and Local Government. And so actually, I didn't get into city management right out of college, but shortly there, I was living and working in San Antonio, Texas, and wasn't very happy with the job. And one day I was walking downtown San Antonio, which at the time was the 13th largest city in the country, and now it's the 8th largest. And this was 50 years ago. And literally stopped in my tracks and made a 180-degree turn and walked 5 blocks into City Hall. Didn't know anybody. Just so happened that the deputy city manager was available to talk to me. And he said, "Hey, we're looking for a couple of people with degrees and no experience." So he set me up with an interview with the city manager of San Antonio, and I got the job, and I was only there a week or two, and I said, I loved it. This is great, and I never looked back.
Wow. Well, neat. And so San Antonio, Moline, Illinois. Are you from New York?
I grew up in Syracuse, or
Okay.
a suburb of Syracuse, um, and went to, of course, Syracuse, and I got a master's degree in public administration from University of Cincinnati. And
Oh,
I met my wife at Syracuse. She got a master's degree from Syracuse. My son has a law degree from Syracuse, as does President Biden. And I can tell you why he went to Syracuse. And sorry. And then my daughter has two master's degrees from Syracuse. So all four of us have degrees from Syracuse, and that's why we bleed orange.
all right. Well, at the risk of being overly punny, you're both an orange man and a tall man. So, and I have, don't know if you know this about me, but I'm originally from Cincinnati. So,
Oh,
uh, you know,
and my daughter was born in Cincinnati.
well, there you go. Well, very
Yeah.
nice. Okay, so I guess you chose not to retire or quasi-retire because you certainly haven't been retired yet. I don't know what other activities you're into, but retiring from the legislature here for sure. You don't like snow that much up in Syracuse, so you're here in Albuquerque. What brought you to the land of enchantment? Kind of, you know, just generally
My
speaking.
daughter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All
when
right.
I'm the oldest state senator
Okay.
at 83, but I came here when I was 66, and yeah, I didn't know anybody, and I really never expected to work again, um, because I didn't know anybody, and there aren't that many jobs in city management in New Mexico, and my age. But I applied for the city manager of Santa Fe, and I was one of five people interviewed. They narrowed it down to myself and the acting city manager. They gave it to the job to the acting city manager, and they said, "Well, would you like to be the deputy city manager?" I said, "Sure." And they moved the guy out of that position into the planning department, and so I worked there for a short period of time.
Oh, okay. So, what made you run for the legislature in New Mexico?
Well, I was on my bucket list.
Oh,
I'm very gold oriented. It was on
that's an
my list.
interesting bucket list item.
I was on my gold list of things to do, and of course, the first time I lost, and then the second try I won. Also ran in 2011. I ran for city council against Brad Winter. He'd been in office 8 to 10 years by that time, and he because he beat me 42 to 58, and then in 12 I ran for state senate and lost to Lisa Taraco by 850 votes, and in 2016 I won by 450, and then in 20 I won by 2,800.
All right. Well, um, so I mean, you are an ideas oriented person. I think that's safe to say, and we're going to get into the policy aspects of it. It's just you threw me for a loop when you said that it was on your bucket list because normally people, especially who have kind of done a lot of things in their lives, they don't want to jump into the political realm, but maybe they get there because there's a corruption scandal or they see something specific that really drives them nuts about the way government works, and they say, "Oh, I'm going to, fight it," and then they wind up being an activist, and then they run for office. But that's not your personal path. Uh, but to be fair, you've written and discussed extensively a lot of different issues that you kind of would like to see addressed in New
Yeah.
Mexico. And your most recent article has to do with the capital outlay process. And you know, it, I won't get into too much about it because we've talked about the capital outlay process, and it's widely recognized across all partisan lines that this process is broken. Talk about from your perspective specifically why you think the process is broken and how you want to see it changed.
Well, it's broken because it's it's not the system is not professional, and it doesn't prioritize the projects, and it's just not the way it's recommended. It's the fact we're ranked the second worst capital outlay system in the country by Governing Magazine, and in most states, cities, and counties, they have a 10, 15, 20-year plan whereby year one, they decide which projects are going to be built and allocate a specific amount of money. And then they do that for each succeeding year of the plan. In New Mexico, we just kind of go year to year. It's a haphazard way of doing business. There's no prioritizations, there's no vetting, and then consequently, some projects that should get built don't get built, and vice versa. Because and so it's haphazard in the sense that all 112 legislatures are deciding how the money is being expended and allocated. And the most important thing is it's not getting no prioritization. And so and every legislator has different needs. Like, and I'm a good example. In my case, all the roads and the roads are taken care of by the city, and that's water is by the Bernalillo County Albuquerque Water Authority. But there's a lot of senators and legislators in the rural areas have big ticket road and water items, and they get the same amount of money as I do. So consequently, most of my money goes outside of my district. And I'm even hesitant to give money to the schools because they can bond. And it's just a system that it's just mind-boggling. And there's two big problems. They're not prioritized on a statewide basis like they should be. And the second big problem is the reason we have such a big $5.2 billion sitting in reserve that should have been or could have been spent by now is because the agency or someone asked for $1 million. In the first year, they only get 100,000, and then the second year they might get another 100,000. And so that $200,000 sits there. And it was only 4 years ago that the amount of money sitting idle was $1 billion, and it's mushroomed over the last 3 or 4 years from $1 billion to $5.2 billion. And then, as we all know, construction costs have skyrocketed, and according to the LFC, construction costs have gone up in New Mexico much faster and higher than other states. And so that money that could have been or should have been spent by now is not going to go as far, obviously, because of the high inflation, high increase in the cost of construction, which is really kind of sad, because if they had a different system, that money would have spent by now, and we could have done more projects that we're going to be able to do in the future.
So I'll put you on the spot, but you are still a state senator. So if you were to kind of have the opportunity to redesign our capital outlay process in New Mexico, any broad ideas or very specific ideas as to what you would like to see done? Is it just a matter of prioritization and largely keeping it intact, or are there broader reforms that you think need to be addressed?
No, it's not complicated. As I said earlier, it's the system that's used everywhere I was and is used by most cities, counties, and states is to have a 15, 20, either a 10, 15, 20-year capital improvement plan whereby each of those years they have decided what projects are going to develop, and then budget the specific amount of money it'll take to do those projects. So because through that system, if you have a plan of how much you're going to spend so you can budget a certain amount, then you're obviously not going to have a big surplus sitting idle. So you say you have 10 projects, $1 million a piece, that's $10 million. So you budget $10 million and you go ahead and construct those projects. So consequently, under that system, you're not going to have a lot of money sitting idle. So in our system, obviously, if you ask for, as I said before, if you ask for $1 million, you get 100,000 the first year. So that sits there because you don't have enough money to start the project. And then the next year, you might get 200,000. So you got 300,000, but still not enough to start the project. And so you get $300,000 sitting there. It's just, it doesn't make sense. It's not the professional way. That's no experts who have expertise in construction, civil engineers, people who finance projects would never recommend that type of system for the for two simple reasons. One, you're not prioritizing, and you've got money sitting unused for 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 projects that could have been or should have been um, standard. I can't find another state that does this.
Right.
So why? um, so if it was a good way of doing business, why are we the only state that I have been able to find that does it like this? Like say, most states have set up a committee or a commission made up of, every state's different. Some states have everybody on the commission is a legislator. Some states, um, most of the people are experts, either financial experts, construction people, finance people. And then some states is a combination of legislatures and experts in the field of infrastructure
Yeah.
who prioritize and vet the projects on a statewide basis. On a statewide basis, because I said before, not every legislature has the same number needs. I don't have very many infrastructure needs, very few in my district, whereas other districts, especially in the rural areas, have tremendous big ticket infrastructure needs and wants.
Yeah, there's no question that, especially in rural New Mexico, they're paying for the entire cost of their senior center or recreation center or road building, et cetera. Whereas you're right, in urban areas like Albuquerque, it's not quite the same level of
Mm.
need. Uh, you know, so $16 million, presumably from the governor, gets put into Balloon Fiesta Park, and you know, my looking at that says, well, this is related to the United Stadium and that kind of thing. So, uh, it's hard to say sometimes even where the money is ultimately going to be used uh, when you get into the capital outlay bill, because it's just a one liner and very vague. And I think they, in the case of the United Stadium, they actually shifted money from one purpose at Balloon Fiesta Park to another use at Balloon Fiesta Park, and it's lacking in transparency and lacking in all kinds of other things as well.
Yeah, well, there's there's no this is something at the whim of the governor. There's no prioritization.
Right.
There's no um, vetting. It's just it, it there just should be more people involved in these decisions and more facts brought to the table as opposed to just somebody saying, "Well, I want to do this project."
Fair enough. All right. Well, we definitely have other items that we want to talk about, and one of the things that you had written an op-ed, and it's kind of how we started talking over several months ago. Back in October, you had written a piece in the Albuquerque Journal. I don't expect you to remember all aspects of it, but I briefly, you mentioned the capital outlay process, which we just talked about. You mentioned oil and gas and you mentioned education. Those are some areas of our state and the political system here that you feel are not adequately being prioritized, and the process in place is not uh, effective in, well, you say replace oil and gas revenues, and I think we may have a philosophical disagreement over whether those revenues are going to continue to grow or not grow, and uh, we can talk a little bit about that. But talk about your vision, broadly speaking, of the oil and gas industry and how it fits into New Mexico before we dive into some of the specific issues there.
Well, we're obviously too dependent on the oil and gas industry. I mean, and it doesn't seem. I didn't hear one word during the late this last legislative session about how we're going to diversify our economy. It's inevitable. We may disagree, but the fact all the experts agree that there's definitely going to be a reduction in the revenues from oil and gas. It's not going to go on forever. You know, General Motors has already announced that they're going to stop producing gas-powered cars by 2035. And I just read an article in Bloomberg yesterday that China's got a electric vehicle that's $9,900, and the Ford Motor Company is scrambling behind the scenes to how they're going to compete with that. And there's no way that we're going to. When the American public finds out you can buy a car for $9,900, electric car for $9,900, they're not going to be putting up with. They're not going to agree to put high tariffs so they can't get these cars. So they're scrambling around. Just in this Bloomberg article yesterday to figure out how we're going to compete with China, and they've already decided to reduce their emphasis and spending money on producing expensive, high-priced SUVs and direct that money, billions of dollars, into producing much cheaper electric vehicles. I'm the first state legislature 6 years ago to buy a total electric car. I love the car because it's fast acceleration, it's quiet, it's less maintenance. Even in the Consumer Reports had an article in March of last year in their monthly issue that it was ranked the cheapest car to maintain. Then I have an app on my phone that tells me how much I've spent based on New Mexico electricity rates and on electricity, and then they give me the equivalent cost in gasoline, and it's usually typically it might be $80 in electricity, and the equivalent cost in gas about $200. So I figure over a 5 year period, I figured I'd be saving about $5,000. And the typical cost of a gas powered car now is $48,000, which seems unbelievable. And the average cost of an electric vehicle is $53,000, and the average cost, believe it or not, of a full size pickup truck is $63,000. So we had a senator that loves to make fun of me by saying only rich people can afford electric vehicles. Well, I actually bought my car used at, at a very favorable price. So, and he drives a full size pickup, and he makes fun of me for calling me a rich person, even though I paid a lot less for my electric vehicle than his full size pickup truck.
Well, I wasn't planning to go down the EV path right now, but since you kind of threw it out there, given all of that,
Well, I didn't answer your question.
but yeah, we'll come back to that. We've gone down the road too far at this point. So, you were at testimony at the Construction Industries Division when they were talking about the EV charger issue, and I'm going to assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you're supportive of what the EIB did with the Environmental Improvement Board. I think you were there too. I may have seen you uh, back in November before the EIB when they were pushing the 43%, 82% mandates through the through that body. So since we're talking about electric vehicles, I'm for the market to decide what, you know, by the market I mean individual car buyers to decide what they want to buy. Why do you think the government should be involved in pressing so aggressively on this issue and mandating electric vehicles? If EVs are as superior as you say they are, why do we need to subsidize them and to mandate their use?
Well, we have a history of subsidizing a lot of new technology. We're not making an exception with electric vehicles. Plus, well, I have to admit, and I'm not saying this because you don't agree with me, but this is not a terribly progressive state. I mean, even though we're Democrats, we're progressive on the hot button issues like abortion and marriage. But think about it, we're really not that progressive on most other things. So for us to be progressive on I guess I'm not against it, but then on the other hand, we got so many other things that we should be addressing, and we're only less than 1% of the population in America. So what we do here is not going to make a huge difference. A state like California, yes. Um, Last year, 10% of their car sales were electric vehicles. In New Mexico, is less than 1%. So um, I wasn't a huge flag waver on this issue, but I did have to be, obviously, supported it um, because people, well, just because it's a good idea and maybe electric vehicles make a lot of sense, it doesn't mean people are going to automatically adopt them. And you mentioned the free market. Well, as I just said, the 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 cars. There's no question the cars are cheaper to operate because there's less there's less moving parts. It's basically a battery and an electric motor with two moving parts. There's no radiators, no exhaust system, there's no alternator, there's no carburetor, and the engine is the size of a huge watermelon. And then, as I've said before, the gas, it's quieter, it's less polluting, and it's the gas, the electricity is cheaper than purchasing gasoline. So to answer your question, to summarize what I've just said is yes, was I a huge, yes, I voted for it and I supported it, but is it going to make a huge difference? No. And should we be addressing other issues uh, that we're not? It doesn't. Well, anyway, I didn't really answer. Did I answer your question?
Well, somewhat. I understand you want you see progressive as a generally good thing, in New Mexico being, and there. I agree with you on the things that we are definitely so-called progressive on, which is abortion and some of the other issues. But on the other hand, we're not a forward-looking state embracing the latest trends naturally. I think that comes back to the fact that we're such a rural state. And you mentioned your
Right.
state senator, unnamed state senator friend driving his fancy pickup. Uh, I do think there are real concerns among rural folks about the viability of electric vehicles out in rural areas, long distances, heavy kind of machinery, those kind.
Well, you're absolutely right. That's why um, the hybrid plug-in makes a lot of sense in rural areas. And until we get um, more charging stations. You know, when automobiles first came on the scene, um, there was a lack of gasoline stations. You know, and then with the advent of automobiles, horses didn't disappear overnight. They went, in fact, in 1945, you know, the automobiles came out in the early 1900s. 1945, on my grandfather's farm, he still used horses, and so horses were used for a long time
Sure.
on farms for decades after the automobile came on the scene, and there was this obviously a shortage of gasoline stations, but they now have Tesla has cars now that go 500 miles on a on a filling, and I just read the other day that they actually have batteries now that'll go 1,000 miles
Right.
on a charge. So it's gonna evolve. Uh, Colorado has 9 times. 2 years ago, they had 9 times more charging stations in New Mexico. They have 3 times the population. So you do the math. They have 3 times more charging stations per capita than we do here in New Mexico. So yes, that is an issue. But over time, you're going to see a lot more availability of charging stations, and no question that the cars will are now have the capability of going 500 miles on a fill. And there's just read yesterday there's technology that's been developed that there's batteries that'll take you 1,000 miles. So
And my concern, and I want to move on to some other points, but my concern is not whether EVs are the way of the future or not. And you clearly think that they are. I'm skeptical. I'm willing to consider that they may be, but um, it's the government policy, it's the mandates, and there was never a mandate that taxpayers finance gas stations, or that we mandate the use of a given technology through government policy. And whether that's Washington D.C., which I understand Biden is going to be pushing his own mandates
well,
relating to EVs, that kind of
yeah.
thing.
Well, I had
So
a bill last year. It was only $10 million for EV credits. Now, $10 million is 1/10 of not even 1/10 of 1% of our budget. So we're not spending huge sums of money. And you mentioned the free market. As I said before, I think people are going to realize eventually that it's going to be an easy choice because they're cheaper to maintain, and gas and electricity is cheaper than gas. So they're gonna switch
fair
on their
enough.
own accord. So we're not spending huge amounts of money on these credits. So there is a precedent for maybe giving tax credits at the when new technology first arrives upon the scene in order to push people. But no, would I agree to spending immense, massive amounts of money on these tax credits? No, but we're spending just a fraction of 1% of the state budget on this particular tax credit.
Well, let me move on to something that we do agree on, which is that you had sponsored a bill. I believe it was vetoed in the last legislative session by the governor, though, that would have uh, levied a fee on EV owners to pay for the
Yeah.
roads,
Well,
and that was something that I thought was a
yeah.
good, correct policy, back to the capital outlay kind of thing. So, talk about that. What happened with it? Why? What you, if anything, heard from the governor in terms of why she was opposed to it?
I didn't hear from the governor, but I totally wholeheartedly agree that EVs owners should pay a, a tax or an extra registration fee in order to support the maintenance and construction of highways. It only makes sense. I can't understand why something like that didn't get through. Senator Gonzalez had a bill this year that I signed on to that would establish a $120 registration fee uh, for EV owners. And I couldn't understand why that couldn't get through.
Right.
Um, so I wholeheartedly support that. But the I went to a conference last summer of 23. It was put on by the automotive innovative automobile innovation alliance, and one of the things they talked about was registration fees for EV. And the consensus was that the best way would be to put a device is to pay by the mile. Um,
Yeah, and I know that was done in Oregon. I think there's privacy concerns
there's
about that. Yeah.
exactly you jumped. I was just going to say that it's probably the best way of doing it, but then you get into privacy issues. Personally, I wouldn't care if the government knew how many miles I was driving, but and there's other options too. But there again, there are states. We're one of the last states to do a lot of things. A lot of the bills I sponsor, I use the argument we're one of only 6 states that haven't done this. We're one of only 4 states. We're one of only 2 states. And most people couldn't care less about what the other states are doing. But yeah, I have a list of the states around the country and how much they're paying, and it seems like most of them, the vast majority, have already adopted some kind of special fee for EV vehicles, and we can't get that done here. It's disappointing.
Well, we don't have too much time, and I actually did want to talk to you about your criticism of the legislature not doing the economic diversification, because I agree, regardless of the oil and gas industry and whether it's a long term winner or whether things are going to drop off in the not too distant future, we do need to diversify our economy. Why don't you think the legislature has chosen to be more aggressive with regard to, or the governor with regard to, embracing policies that would diversify our economy? And we may disagree on what specific policies we think would do that, but just as one example, you all, the legislature, passed a budget of about $650 million this past session, and you reduced tax burdens through credits and some actual tax cuts to about $200 million. That's about $850 million. The oil and gas budget surplus, the overall budget surplus, largely from oil and gas, was $3.5 billion this session. So you only used about $850 million of $3.5 billion available to you. Would tax reduction be an appropriate way to diversify the economy? What other ideas are being kicked around, or are you kicking around, that you think should be taken up in Santa Fe?
Well, I've heard you speak about the fact that you believe that we're putting away, putting aside too much money. Although I respectfully disagree with you that because sure, oil and gas is not going to go away completely, but there's no question. Most experts agree that it's going to be a reduction. So we should be. I think it's very smart on the part of the state to be putting uh, these extra one-time revenues into trust funds, permanent funds, reserve funds, whatever you want to call it. I think it's something that we should do. Um, no, we did give a tax rebate each of the last 2 years, but not this year. Um, I might have been, but then you could argue too that if we re- reduce the taxes and the spending too much, and we're just going to have to raise them um, again in the future. So I think it's smart that we're doing putting this extra one-time money into reserve funds, permanent funds, and reserve funds, because I think it's inevitable that there's going to be a reduction in the revenues from oil and gas. Now, we could disagree on the amount, but I think we both agree that it's going to be reduced, but nobody really knows to what extent. But it's still, we shouldn't be so dependent on our oil and gas revenues. You know, the in 2021, the Economic Development Department did a smart thing. They commissioned a study from a professional organization that made some recommendations on what industries we should be pursuing. But the legislature's never taken that up. They've never done the next step is, well, which of these recommendations should we adopt? Which industry should we concentrate on to diversify our economy? There's been no discussion there was no discussion that I know of this year, and the experts are predicting that the oil and gas revenues are going to be reduced starting in 2013. That's only 6 years away. 2030.
30. Okay.
And so that's 6 short years away. And you don't turn around the economy. It could take decades in order to really get to diversify our economy to the extent that it needs to be done. I think it's very disappointing and short-sighted. Why aren't they doing it? Well, one reason, I guess the Republicans feel that this oil and gas bonanza is going to go on forever. And I don't know, I can't speak for the others who don't feel that way. I guess they're so busy doing their own thing. Maybe it's not a very sexy issue. They feel that it'll get votes. I don't know. I don't have.
Well,
really
the Republicans don't have the votes to do anything in Santa Fe. So I know in the House, Representative Townsend, who will be moving to the Senate next legislative session, he put forth a bill to take New Mexico's personal income tax down to 1% across the board. Now, we could philosophically debate and discuss. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. What effectiveness that would have in diversifying our economy, but it is a proposal, a specific proposal. So, and I do want to ask you this before we conclude. Like, what general means of economic diversification would you advocate for? Is it subsidizing specific industries, tax breaks, exemptions, some kind of educational programs to train workers for various industries? What is your kind of, without getting into the industries themselves, how do you see New Mexico diversifying its economy? Because that does need to be an intentional process, no matter how we do it. There's got to be some intentionality there.
Well, 1%
Personal
income tax,
yeah.
or 1% GRT.
Personal income tax is what he put forth.
Well, so how would he replace that?
Well,
how does he propose to replace the money?
So, according to numbers that I saw from Townsend, that would reduce state revenue by about $1.75 billion annually. I think the PIT brings in about 2.3, and by taxing everybody at 1%, his estimate is 1.75 billion. So maybe that's too much, but the fact is they would put New Mexico on the map in terms of economic development. So,
I'm here to. Oh, where is that chart? Doggone. Oh, here. Well, I'm here to tell you that one day I made a comment in the legislature.
Okay.
It said, of course, I was exaggerating to make a point. I said, I don't care if we go to zero taxes. Businesses still aren't going to come here because of our poor education and high crime. And the Voices for Children put that on their front page of their website. So here's a chart from the New Mexico Chamber of most important issues for site selectors. You have to get down to number 6 before they talk about taxes. Number 1 is infrastructure. Number 2 is skilled labor. 3 is labor costs. 4 is quality of life, which is education, crime.
Sure.
Number 5 is construction costs. and you get down to number 6. My point being that a lot of people, they think, well, all we got to do is reduce regulations and taxes and we're going to be in heaven. Well, it's not that simple, because taxes aren't as important to people. What is important to people is the skilled labor and availability of availability of skilled labor and infrastructure and quality of life. People, you can, 100 years ago, you had to be near natural resources. You had to be on a river or near iron ore. Well, today, because of modern communication, you can be anywhere. So what do they look for? They look
Right.
for quality of life. And so to me, and according to the Tax Foundation, New Mexico ranks dead middle, number 25. We're high on GRT. We're in the middle on personal income tax, and we're very low on property tax. So that's where we, high on one, low on another, and in the middle on, and we're in the middle.
Fair. Right.
So I contend that that's not what do we need to do in order to attract businesses. Is one, we need to improve our education, reduce the crime, and then that woman, I forget her name, that runs the Albuquerque Regional Alliance, Economic Development Alliance, and she's been pushing for site selection. She says we need to have shovel-ready sites or sites that have infrastructure already in and ready to go, because people want to move fast. We need to do that. And we need to have more to improve the availability of skilled labor. Now, CNM, I think, does a terrific job.
Sure.
They've won national awards, and so we need to do a better job of meeting, of training people to meet the needs of people who are looking for people to hire. And I think, like I said, CM's doing a great job. We need to continue doing that. South Carolina has been extremely successful with because they spend a lot of money on worker training. So that's worker training, site availability, improve our education, and reduce crime are things that we can do that aren't necessarily high cost. But everybody else, it's like an arms race. Some of these states give terrific tax incentives. So unfortunately, and then everybody feels that they have to meet it. It's an arms race. It's unfortunate that the states can't get together and say, well, no, let's not, none of us will be giving these tax breaks, because
Right.
people, they go where these tax breaks are, which is unfortunate.
All right. Well, Senator, we're gonna have to cut it off there. We're already over time, but a lot of areas of agreement. I agree with you on tax breaks, for example. Would like to make tax breaks unnecessary by reducing overall tax burdens. We can maybe talk about that some other time. I do appreciate your public service and your willingness to come on and exchange ideas with us. I think it was a very productive and informative conversation, but we're kind of in a 45 or so minutes window here. So Senator Bill Tallman, Senate District 18, serving out the balance of your term, presumably no special session. I'm going to say that I take that 75% and say it's a no-go on the special session, but we'll see. Maybe we'll see you back up in Santa Fe before you leave that legislative body. So thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.